Hello and welcome to the Delivering Instant Satisfaction with Bill Payments via FedNow webinar. I'm Christine Milishevsky from the Federal Reserve and I will be your moderator. Before turning the call over to our speakers, I'll run through our call logistics and launch a polling question for participants to respond. You should see the polling question pop up on the webinar player page. I'll read the questions and options for you and give you some time to take and note your response. The polling question asks, for consumer bill payment, which is the main challenge for your organization? Your options are A, limited offerings to support faster payments, B, lack of transparency for payment status, C, difficulty for consumer to add new billers, D, limited payment methods, enable different accounts from which to make payments, credit cards, and E, other. While you're responding to the polling question, I'll run through our call logistics. For the best webinar experience, use the FAQ document, which can be found using the Materials button in the webinar player page. I will highlight a few important notes for you. You can listen to the audio through your PC speakers or through the phone. If you use the phone option, slides will not sync with the audio unless you change your settings. You can do this by selecting the gray gear located on the upper right corner of the slide window just above the presentation. From there, you should see the option in the media chooser and you should select the phone option. You only need to make this adjustment if you're listening through the phone. You can expand the size of the slides. To do this, use the Maximize button in the upper right corner of the slide window. And if you'd like to submit a question, use the Ask Question button on the webinar player. Okay, let's stop the poll and share the results. You should see the results pop up in the webinar player, and I'll share them as well. So, for option A, limited offering to support faster payments, 39% said that was a challenge. Option B, lack of transparency for payment status, 23% showed that that was a challenge. Difficulty for consumers to add new billers was a 5% challenge. And limited payment methods, 16% of you said that that was a challenge. And none of these apply, 18 said that that was a challenge. So on slide 3, I'll now turn it over to Dan Baum, Senior Vice President, FedNow, Product Management, to start today's webinar and discuss the poll results.
Good afternoon, everyone. As just mentioned, my name is Dan Baum and I lead FedNow Product Development and Management. I'd like to start my opening comments with a big thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're certainly excited to have you with us to discuss FedNow and hope it will and how it will support the bill pay use case. This is a brand new opportunity for us and we're very excited, as I just said, to get the conversation going. During the course of our discussion today, we plan to provide a review of bill pay features that will be available at the release of FedNow, and we'll talk about how these features can be used to create compelling experiences for your institutions. You know, while we're building FedNow to support multiple use cases, bill pay is certainly one that we've heard as we've been out in the industry talking to many participants. Now, as I reflect on the polling question, I think it's interesting to look at the results. The things that rose to the top that I jotted down here quickly were the ability to support instant payments as one of the options for bill pay. With 3 college kids, I know I deal with this on a regular basis. And then the second is the transparency for where the payment is in the process of bill pay and whether payments are complete. We've certainly heard that as we've completed a journey to talking to as many industry participants as we can, and we've certainly taken that feedback to heart as we've worked on the development and the design of the FedNow service. I think as we walk through the information today, you'll see much of that covered, and we'd encourage you to participate through questions throughout the course of the seminar or the webinar. On slide 3 here, you'll notice that we have, I'm calling the A team, my colleagues that will join me today in presenting, and they have all the details, so they're going to do the heavy lifting for us here in a minute. Stephanie Miracle, who's a FedNow product management lead. Kelly Comiskey, who's the FedNow product manager. I think I said project earlier. And Kara Ford, a payment specialist with our industry relations team. If we can jump out to slide 4 real quick. We've laid out an agenda that we hope will deliver what you'd like to know about our planned support of bill pay and FedNow. The topics we plan to cover include evolution of consumer to business bill payments, how instant payments can modernize bill payments for billers and customers, and an overview of potential bill pay and request for payment capabilities via FedNow. I think the kind of the bottom line of why we're here. So again, I'd like to thank you all for joining today. We have some great information to cover. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over quickly to Stephanie Miracle to dive right in.
Thank you, Dan. So my name is Stephanie Miracle, and I have over 10 years helping financial institutions and billers better communicate and enable a more seamless experience for their customers. You know, instant payments are heading towards the mainstream, spanning generations. It may have started with digital natives wanting to make P2P payments, but we've seen other generations, Gen X, Boomers, adopt this same capability. As with Amazon's impact on the retail experience, this has implications for other types of transactions, as well as customers' expectations evolving to want to be more fast and more transparent transactions. Bill pay is an area that's ripe for revolution. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the channels and the methods that consumers can make payments today. Research tells us that consumers pay 15 to 20 bills per month. And this diversity of bill payment methods and channels going from being able to pay through ACH, by check, by debit or credit card, as well as being able to pay through the mail or going out to the biller's internet access point, which is their portal, being able to pay through financial institutions' bill pays, or even now emerging with wallets or directories, and even going to retail locations to make those payments. So all of this options may suggest flexibility and convenience. However, billers and consumers say that it also reflects friction. In particular, a real lack of choice in speed and transparency. The preferred method can vary widely based on situation as well as demographics. For example, according to Javelin, consumers that are 18 to 34-year-olds tend to use debit cards to pay bills at a higher rate than their older counterparts. Paper checks are still the most popular way to pay rent. Financially unstable consumers are less likely to utilize auto pay features. Financial uncertainty requires confirmation that funds will be available when paying a bill, or they risk non-sufficient fund fees and corresponding expenses with a payment is returned. So last-minute payments really push financially unstable consumers to prefer debit cards as a payment method. Javelin's March 2020 study called Increasing Payment Options to Maximize Bill Pay's Potential indicated that just 24% of consumers paid all of their bills utilizing financial institutions' bill pay capabilities. And another 22% pay their bills utilizing the biller direct channels, where the consumers interact directly with the biller's website or designated physical location. So that's not really great news for billers or for financial institutions. So let's go to slide 7 and talk about a little bit more deeper dive into these topics. There's been multiple studies, including the 2020 Faster Payments and the Potential to Transform Consumer Bill Pay by Glenbrook Partners, that identifies common challenges with the current bill pay models of either going to the biller directly to make the payments or pay their bill via the financial institutions. You know, it can take anywhere from 1 to 5 business days for a payment to settle using a financial institution's bill payment capabilities. And if the consumer chooses to pay with their credit card from the bank site, well, gosh, this is often treated as a cash advance, and there are associated fees. Consumers are increasingly turning to debit or credit cards to make payments because it enables speed, right? They get credit for that payment right in the moment, as well as addressing transparency around bill pay status, meaning they have confirmation that that payment went through and their account is credited. However, if they use that method, then that means they're going to those 15 to 20 bill sites to make those payments, and that's a hassle for consumers and may have limitations for them too. For example, they may have fewer choices in determining the timing of the payment. So transparency really represents an increasing opportunity for financial institutions for their customers on both sides of the bill pay transaction, both those billers and consumers. Instant payments using request for payment supports straight-through processing for billers, and that saves a lot of time and money. And consumers have control and confidence that the payment is settled immediately. FedNow will support a feature enabling billers as well as others to request payment from customers. This capability mitigates many of the key challenges for consumers and businesses. Let's take a look at slide 8 and the challenges for billers. You know, businesses also struggle with the current bill pay model. For example, if they're not included in a biller directory, they often receive payments in the form of checks. So this is challenging for consumers because it's unclear when the payment will be posted to their account, but it may also increase costs for consumers inquiring about the payment status, not only for the biller but also for the FIs, because if they're not sure where a payment stands, they may be picking up the phone to say, you know, gosh, I made that payment, why isn't it credited to my account? And certainly that's expensive. Billers struggle with lags in payment processing, whether the payment is via ACH or check, and that may result in insufficient funds in the account. So where it looks like there is a payment there, in fact, by the time the funds were supposed to have cleared, they're no longer there. And consumers often make errors in payments, which force manual intervention and delays to resolve those. Finally, if there's questions about the bill, such as unexpected charge or asking for an extension, there's no easy way for customers to communicate with the biller except to pick up the phone or to chat with them. And these are expensive channels. So each of these drive unexpected customer experiences as well as higher costs for businesses. Here, let's pause here and get a little more insights from our participants today.
Sure thing, Stephanie. So in a moment, I'm going to open up a poll for all of you. But first, I would like to invite you to submit any questions for us today by selecting the Ask a Question button that you can find under the audio details on the left-hand side of your screen. So at this time, Christine, if you could open up the poll. Okay. All right, so our polling question today is, where is the greatest opportunity for FedNow in the bill pay space for your institution? Is it for small business billing, mid-sized business billing, large corporate billing, or to enhance your customer experience for your retail consumers? So while this poll is open, we have heard over and over again in industry meetings and as consumers ourselves, we have experienced that there are two critical factors to bill pay. First is the timeliness, And secondly is the certainty of the received payment. It is our goal today as we continue on in this webinar and we introduce to you FedNow bill payment opportunities, that you can see how the FedNow service can reduce friction with bill payments to the segment to which you've responded here. So I'm going to pause for a second. If you have not responded to the poll yet, please take this opportunity to respond. And after a couple of moments, Christine, if you could please close out the poll and let us know what the results are.
Thank you, Kara. So for this second poll, we show that 23% chose small business billing, 16% chose mid-size business billing, and 10% chose large corporate billing, and 52% chose enhanced customer experience for retail consumer customers.
All right, thank you, Christine. Stephanie, do you want to weigh in here on these results?
Yes, thank you everyone for participating. This is really interesting and exciting to me. There's so much focus on that customer experience and wanting to make that valuable for them and really create a compelling experience for these retail customers. But I'm also excited to see the opportunities that the businesses are also getting strong interest in instant payments and how it can create value for them as well. So this is an exciting time in the instant payment space. Let's take a deeper dive on the bill pay capabilities within FedNow on slide 10. With FedNow's initial release, we will support ability to reduce friction within bill payments. Based on conversations with the industry, from bill presentment and payment service providers to financial institutions to consumers and small business accounting solutions, we focused our support on critical features that reflect the most value in the market. On the next slide, we've really prioritized those features that create a compelling experience for the consumer. For example, we will allow businesses to include detailed or summary remittance information in the request for payment. Now, this information can then be returned to the business in the payment message, enabling straight-through processing of the payment. We'll also support either single payment transactions or even capabilities around recurring payments. We're also looking at other items that may help reduce friction in the process. For example, introducing new transparency capabilities such as a final confirmation of payment posting. So this would be if I paid my guys that came in and painted my house and I paid them via FedNow, I could receive a final confirmation of posting that their bank pushes back to through FedNow that says, yes, indeed, the painters did receive that money in their account. So in slide 12, we're seeking to illustrate the flow envisioned for bill payment between a consumer and a biller. For those familiar with the traditional FedNow payment flow, a bill payment would be a traditional credit push transaction like all FedNow transactions are. But there are certain features within the FedNow service, like the inclusion of remittance details in the payment order, confirmation of posting, and fraud controls that will make FedNow particularly well suited for consumer to business bill payment. So here in this first step, the consumer initiates that payment through their payer's bank. Then it would come into FedNow. FedNow would run through steps to validate that payment. Perhaps if the financial institution has enabled the fraud controls, we would also pause on the fraud controls. And then finally, assuming that all is well with that, we send it out to the biller's bank. The biller's bank then would either share that they intend to accept that payment and reply back to FedNow. Assuming that's all well, FedNow sends out a simultaneous response to both the payer's bank and the biller's bank advising those funds have settled. That is separate and apart from the biller's bank could ultimately send another transaction that says, and we've posted it to the biller's account. Let's take a closer look at the FedNow capabilities and how they might be leveraged to create value for your customers. Kelly Kaminsky will explore these ideas further on slide 13.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie, and hi to everyone with us today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Kelly Kaminsky, and I'm part of the FedNow product team. And I'd like to start by expanding a bit on a feature that Stephanie mentioned in her opening, which is a request for payment feature. A request for payment, or an RFP, as we like to refer to it, is a really exciting feature that is outside of or separate from the credit push flow that was illustrated on the previous slide, but something that we believe will be a key enabler in the bill pay space. An RFP is, in simplest terms, the ability of a potential payment recipient, so say in this context a biller, to send a message to a potential sender, like a consumer, to request a payment, like a bill payment. As you can imagine, this feature is relevant not only for bill pay. You could certainly have a person-to-person request for payment, where you could ask your friends for money, paying you back for dinner. You could have an account-to-account or me-to-me transfer using a request for payment. But we wanted to spend some time today in this bill pay webinar on request for payment because we think it really does present a huge opportunity in the bill pay space, particularly for small businesses or infrequent or irregular billers. So if you think about a small local business or a small service provider, like a landscaper, oftentimes they send invoices either through the mail, in paper, or perhaps over email. Small businesses are not often included in biller directories. So as Stephanie mentioned, they often get checks back, which we know can take some time to clear and process. So a request for payment or an RFP could be an alternative and really transformational change for a small business and their clients or consumers. It could really change the way that they bill and get paid. So in the FedNow service, requests for payment will be facilitated with a specific ISO 20022 message that can include, as Stephanie referred to before, and carry remittance information from the biller, and then that could link to a credit push transfer back if the consumer chooses to accept the request for payment. So while the request for payment message itself does not obligate the consumer to pay, it does create a nice seamless way to initiate a bill payment that will contain the necessary remittance information back to the biller so it can be used in its own reconciliation processes. The ability to send and receive a request for payment will require a user interface to view and manage responses. So this would be provided outside the FedNow service by participating FIs. As I just mentioned, in a request for payment, billers will have the opportunity to include that remittance information or a link to an e-bill, for instance, where consumers would have the opportunity to see details regarding the payment, and that can be, of course, carried through to the biller in a payment back. Request for payment could be really useful not only for one-time payments, but also for recurring bills. I mentioned earlier the example of a local landscaping company sending an RFP
versus a paper invoice. But certainly you could see requests for payment being useful in the recurring bill pay space, things like utilities, things like cell phone bills and gym memberships. Oftentimes, consumers will set up an auto debit or an ACH payment for recurring bills like this. But if the consumer wishes to retain more control over the payment, or if billers want to reduce the risk of insufficient funds, which sometimes happens with debit payments, then this would be a really nice way to facilitate a credit push bill payment on a recurring basis. So we think it's relevant not only for those one-off invoices, but also in the recurring bill pay space. We could support various responses to a request for payment. So you could accept it, someone could reject it, perhaps with a reason code indicating why they're rejecting it, or other potential responses. And RFP allows for some flexibility in your payment back. So you could pay in full, or you could pay some other amount. So those are some of the basics of request for payment. Why don't we move to slide 14, and we can talk about some of the additional features that we are considering. So in addition to some of the basics that we covered on the previous slide, we're considering some other capabilities which we think might be helpful to further streamline or enhance the bill pay process. So on the sending financial institution or sending FI side, that is the sender of the RFP, we're considering the ability for the biller, which would be the sending FI, to configure an expiration of a request for payment, so that a request for payment does not persist indefinitely in the systems of the FI. So we've heard some interest in this from financial institutions, particularly who have billers as clients. We are considering requiring that a request for payment can be populated with the business name or the biller's name using the name on record with the financial institution, so that the recipient of the request for payment is confident that they're paying the intended party. And this, we think, will help to mitigate any concerns related to fraud, so that it's coming from a recognizable party. On the receiving financial institution side, so this would be receiving the RFP, we're considering a confirmation of receipt of RFP to serve as a kind of proof of receipt for the biller. So this would make it known to the biller that the financial institution has received the request for payment and has made it available to the end user or to the consumer. And within FedNow, we're considering identifying and making transparent the participants who support requests for payment, so that we don't have requests for payment messages being sent to financial institutions who are not currently supporting the feature. We're also considering supporting a request for information on a request for payment, or facilitating some other communication back to the biller if, for instance, more information is needed on a request for payment. So hopefully I've convinced you that request for payment has the potential to be a really powerful feature, one that can potentially change the way consumer to business bill payments are made. I personally recently purchased a home, and I'm paying a lot of one-off invoices to small businesses via checks. And once I mail that check, I have no idea what the status of my payment is to, for instance, an HVAC provider, until I get the confirmation, sometimes weeks later, that I'm all squared up. So I can't help but think that request for payment would really present a huge opportunity for small businesses and consumers alike. So why don't we talk about maximizing value for businesses on slide 15, and what opportunity this presents for businesses in particular. So bill payment through FedNow provides some real opportunities for business clients who may, as I just referred to, rely on paper or email invoices to bill consumers and rely on checks. It could certainly help to reduce errors and facilitate automated processing of payments because that remittance information is included in the payment. If a biller, for instance, a small business sends a request for payment, that can contain details that will help with processing and reconciliation, but without the risk of potentially disclosing something sensitive like the biller's bank account details. FedNow will help financial institutions offer services to business customers that will help to improve their business's cash flow. So a request for payment, for instance, can be sent in an instant to a customer and can be responded to instantly versus an invoicing and billing process. Paper is also incredibly costly for billers, so this could reduce the cost associated with paper and postage. We think that speed efficiencies that request for payment can potentially introduce can translate into better cash management for businesses, but also introduce processing efficiencies which can reduce costs. And we anticipate that supporting a range of response options will help to increase flexibility both for the biller and the consumer. So there's an opportunity for FedNow to facilitate a means to request information or facilitate communications between billers and consumers, as I mentioned previously. Okay, why don't we flip to slide 16 and talk about what this means for consumers. So consumers, like you and I, stand to benefit a lot from the opportunity to pay bills instantly via FedNow. We expect that request for payment feature will improve the customer bill pay experience by making data and information related to the bill more accessible, and will allow for an exchange perhaps with the biller that can't easily happen today. Like Stephanie mentioned, it's often a phone call that's an expense for both parties. So this will allow kind of an automated way to have an exchange with the biller. The status of the bill payment will be more transparent to consumers. So this, of course, is good for billers, but great for consumers. So FIs could potentially provide consumers with a final confirmation of posting so that they know that the payment has been made versus, for instance, the check example I provided where it's kind of unclear where the status of the payment stands. And finally, bill pay via FedNow can easily facilitate bill pay for customers via a variety of account types, which is a degree of flexibility that customers should value since most bill payments right now are tied to a particular account that's not easy to change, especially in the recurring bill pay space. All right, and so let's flip to slide 17 and we'll talk about what this means for your financial institution. So we've talked about maximizing value for businesses. We've talked about the opportunities this presents for consumers. So now let's talk about what this means for financial institutions who are the participants in FedNow. So bill payment through FedNow will allow your institution to develop and offer products that create new value to customers. This includes presentment and payment for your own products, like your loan products and your credit card products. We see both bill pay through FedNow and also request for payment helping with the onboarding of new customers and account setup. So it's burdensome for customers to set up bill pay, but if they're billed via a request for payment, you can avoid that lengthy setup process. And it can also reduce costs for you and facilitate straight-through processing of transactions and hopefully attract and retain your client base.
So that's what we wanted to highlight to you in terms of maximizing the value of bill payment and request for payment in FedNow. We really urge you to consider the opportunities that we've talked about. And I'll turn it over to Kara, who will cover how we might continue this conversation together. Thanks, Kelly. If we can move to slide 18. All right, so we are excited to announce that we'll be hosting several roundtable sessions coming up here in October, where we will be inviting financial institutions to join us in collaborative sessions that are focused around this bill pay discussion in more detail. So in our first session, we will discuss the current state of bill pay for your institution. During this session, we're going to deep dive into identifying gaps, issues, and challenges for adoption in your current ecosystem at your financial institution for facilitating these bill payments. Some of the discussion will be around addressing barriers that you may have now in terms of adopting instant payments. We'll be talking about building your roadmap and offering instant payment options both to consumers and to billers. And this session will be held on Thursday, October 15th from 2 to 4 Eastern. In our second session, we're going to continue the discussion. And during that session, we plan to work through targeted use cases for business payments and again, discussing roadmap priorities. So to go into more depth, we're going to work through the identification of priority use cases for instant payments and how they can solve your current state issues for your client base. We'll be holding this session on Wednesday, October 21st from 2 to 4 Eastern. And again, for those who are interested, we invite you to join one or both of the roundtable sessions by signing up via the FedNow community website. There will be a link online on the website where you can enter your contact information and the expression of interest, and then we will send a follow-up invite afterwards. On to slide 19. All right, so at this time, we would like to open the webinar up to the questions that were submitted both through the registration process as well as throughout the webinar. We received many questions during registration as well as throughout our time here, so I am going to address as many as we can with the time that's permitted. So our first question is for you, Stephanie. How will this be a better service than existing bill pay schemes?
Sarah, you know, we think there are a few key benefits of bill pay through FedNow over other schemes. For example, speed. The ability to instantly pay a bill will help customers to avoid expensive late fees and will provide greater flexibility on when they make that payment. An instant credit push transfer means the biller can manage cash flow better and reduces the risk of insufficient funds. And they will receive the funds without a 2 to 3 day lag that often comes with ACH and certainly with checks. Finally, transparency is key for both the consumer and the biller to be able to have the opportunity to know the exact status of the bill payment because they will have the opportunity to receive a confirmation of posting.
Great, thank you. Our next question is also for you, and our question is, how will bill pay work without a directory?
You know, that's really interesting. We anticipate that our bill pay solution will work well with existing directory rails. The bill pay service providers can support the same process as today, just using FedNow Instant Payments as an option. If a business is not within those directories or as an alternative, the request for payment feature allows for billers to send a payment request to their customer's bank using account number and routing number or the customer alias in the future, such as an email address or phone number. The customer can then respond with a payment without having to enter the biller's account details because those are already embedded inside that request for payment and can just automatically be populated by the bank behind the scenes.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. And lastly for you, I have, will the Fed be developing a front-end or consumer-facing application for bill pay for consumer use?
You know, we get a lot of requests for this, but we will not build or manage a front-end user interface for bill payment or other use cases. Rather, FedNow will serve as the rails that will transfer bill payments with greater speed than is possible today by leveraging user interfaces that FIs or service providers develop and offer to their clients.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Kelly, a question for you. A lot of consumers like the set it and forget it aspect of debit payments for bill pay. Is there anything like that with FedNow?
It's a great question. So FedNow is going to be a credit push system only, meaning that the debtor or consumer needs to push the funds from their account to the account of the beneficiary, in this case the biller. So while there won't be an automatic pull, so to speak, like recurring bills, like you might pay your utilities bill with or your cell phone bill with currently, one of the things that we're considering is an auto-authorized feature for requests for payment, where a consumer like me or you could establish this auto-authorized for requests for payments that come in on a regular basis to their financial institution. So the financial institution would then auto-authorize the credit push payment on behalf of the consumer. If, for instance, the request for payment meets certain parameters. So, you know, if you know what party it comes from and it's within a certain dollar amount range, or it comes within certain dates, expected dates, this means that your financial institution could initiate the credit push. So it means that the transaction will still be credit push, but that the consumer doesn't necessarily have to take action every single billing cycle. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Dan, I have a question for you. What plans, if any, do external bill pay platforms have to connect to your rail? If any, so if there are any external bill pay platforms that do have plans, can you provide any insight on which ones or the expected timing?
Thanks, Kara. And I think maybe what we'll do is talk about just the whole process for engaging the industry-wide in lighting up the bill pay use case. You know, through meetings like this where we have broad participation and active one-on-one industry engagement meetings that the FedNow team is setting up and participating in, we're trying to reach out to as many bill pay industry participants as possible. So financial institutions, private sector providers, et cetera, to engage them in helping us understand what we need to build into our design, but then also the flip of that, us working with them on where they could see themselves plugging in. I think we'll stop short of talking about where anyone fits in that space quite yet, because these are all very young conversations. We're just starting. But I do think the important thing is, you know, as the whole process matures, we're going to continue to work with financial institutions and the industry on how do we gain traction for this use case as part of the FedNow rollout. And as importantly, we're going to be working quickly with the financial institutions to onboard to FedNow, those that are interested in onboarding, so that we can build network and reach as quickly as possible, so that in the process of bill pay, there are biller targets available on the network, so that as Stephanie and Kelly have been pointing out, as you go out to initiate an RFP or as you go out to initiate a bill pay credit push, that there are people on the receiving end that are on the network that can receive these. So the goal will be, through the work with the bill pay providers and with the financial institutions, to light up as many of them onto the network as quickly as possible, so that in a couple of years when we do go live, we quickly gain the scale and reach that will be necessary to add the value to this.
Thanks, Dan. Kelly, to follow up with some of the information that you presented to us earlier, we have a question that came in that said, will you be supporting standalone payments? So payments specifically without RFPs. Is a directory required to support that?
Yeah, good question. We talked a lot about request for payment because we're really excited about this feature, but the question is a good one, and the answer is yes. We will support standalone payments. So although we think request for payment is a really nice opportunity in a way as a means to bill, a consumer, like you or I, could definitely just initiate, what I'll call a traditional credit push transaction as a means to pay your bills. And that would work like any other credit push transaction would work in the FedNow system.
Thanks, Kelly. And Stephanie, to expand a little bit further, we received a question that says, how is FedNow planning to support the data transfer in bill pay? So transfer of invoices, remittance information, shipping info, et cetera.
Great question. So within the, let's start with the request for payment, and then this will easily translate into the payment itself. Inside the request for payment, which is for you ISO 20022 fans out there, that's the pane 013, that's the request for payment. Within that, we're going to support, there's a couple options. You can either include very detailed remittance information that's broken apart each element, and those fields are optional. You can choose to include some or all of the information or none of the information. You could alternatively, there's a summary field where you can enter in information at a summary level. For example, for the in my case, the painting of the house, they could say for painting your exterior. Or there's also the ability to include a hyperlink, and the hyperlink can take you back to a portal that allows them to look at their invoice. So you have different ways of including information within the request for payment, whether that is the detailed remittance information, whether that is as a summary or just a text information, like a memo field, or a hyperlink. All of these fields are optional, and you can choose what makes the most sense for you to use. That information is then persisted in the payment, which is the PAX08, and that gives the information there. So there's different ways that they can go and include different levels of information. The information that gets included in that in the payment includes things like the account number and the routing number of the bank. And that's how the consumer's account is debited and then credited to the biller's account. So it would also include the routing number and account number. Now, in the future, we will offer alias, so for example, a phone number or an email address. So in lieu of routing number and account number, there could also be an alias.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Dan, I have a question for you again about kind of the future of FedNow, but the question came in and said, is there a plan to be able to offer or use FedNow at the point of sale?
Thanks, Kara. That's a great question. So I think while slightly different than the traditional bill pay where a consumer is logging on to an online banking app or some other app and initiating a bill pay, or we've got the request for pay initiated by the biller. You can see tangentially how point of sale is similar in process. I would tell you that while we've heard some discussion of the point of sale, it's certainly not been as intriguing or as often spoken of as this bill pay topic we've had today. So I would tell you that we don't have it currently front of our priority list, but that doesn't mean that the ecosystem of providers that are going to innovate around the core platform that is FedNow, and for that matter, other instant payment solutions, won't find ways to support it. And then at that point, I think it would be important for us to listen to those solutions and see if there was a way that we could support it in the interest of reducing friction and creating efficiencies within the payment system. So I think short answer would be we're not prioritizing or launching at the initial launch with functionality to support it, but we are listening and paying attention and expecting that there will be innovation that occurs in the private sector space around our solution, and then we'll support it as needed if that does happen.
Great, thanks, Dan. So Kelly, I'm going to combine a couple questions here regarding fraud. So our first question is, what measures will FedNow take to prevent the misuse of RFP, as well as, the similar question on what measures will FedNow take in the situation where a creditor sends a request for payment that's not valid, or where the request for pay was intended to kind of trick the account holder into sending a payment that they didn't really mean to pay because it was being sent to a fraudster.
Yeah, thanks. So fraud is one of the concerns that come up frequently as we have discussions with the industry on requests for payment for bill pay, but also in the context of person-to-person payments, or just, like I think we've had some really great examples of, if you could kind of trick someone if you say you're part of a university or a charity, and someone might kind of have a connection to what they believe to be the sender of the request for payment. That could trick people easily into responding to a request for payment. So it's one of the concerns that we hear from the industry, and one that we're thinking hard about. As I mentioned earlier, one of the fraud controls we're considering is a requirement that the sending FI, so that would be the sender of the request for payment, populate the sender's name with the name on record or the DBA on record at the financial institution, so that it can't be changed. So that way the receiver of the request for payment can know it's coming from a known or expected entity. But this is one of the topics that we really want to discuss more with the industry, and something that we have queued up for discussion at the roundtable discussions that Kara mentioned earlier. So we'd love to explore with the industry some of the potential fraud controls you're interested in seeing, so that we can take those into consideration as we further develop this feature and the service. So perhaps a plug for coming to roundtable discussions so we can explore this more.
Thanks, Kelly. Dan, I have another one for you. For large billers, wouldn't ACH recurring payments or email advices be less labor-intensive than one-at-a-time requests for payment?
Yeah, thanks, Kara. I think that in many instances, there are appropriate payment rails to support appropriate payment types, and in many ways, recurring bill pays where you can set it up as a recurring debit can most easily be provided through the ACH rail, and we're not suggesting today that the FedNow solution will replace the efficiency or elegance, frankly, of the ACH solution. What we think is the case, however, is that for some use cases, sub-use cases of the bill pay use case, where there are last-minute bill pay and someone has to pay instantly, which often happens. I joked earlier about my college kids, but which often happens when they say they need their parking fees paid or they're not going to get their grades or something like that, and it has to be done by 3 o'clock this afternoon. We think that there's a supplementary or complementary use case for instant payments, in this case FedNow, to support ACH in providing bill pay.
Thanks, Dan. So just based on time where we're at on today's webinar, we are going to wrap up our question and answer session. We thank you all for submitting your wonderful questions. We are excited to see the interaction today on our webinar. If we could move to slide 20. On slide 20, we have 3 dedicated opportunities if you have more interest in learning about the FedNow service. So first, you could go to frbservices.org, and on there is where you'll find detailed information related to the FedNow service, as well as the opportunity to follow along with news and announcements related to anything that's coming out regarding the FedNow. Secondly, we have the FedNow community, as many of you who are with us today are already involved in. As you know, the community has been designed to be an interactive space where industry leaders can learn more details about the service and see any upcoming events like this webinar or the roundtables that we talked about. And you have the opportunity to register for them as well as interact with us in poll questions. And lastly, the third link here is the Federal Register notice. And on that link, you can review the detailed information in the notice and read it in full. And if you read it in full, that's the full description of what we are planning for the FedNow service. With that being said, I thank you all for joining us today and taking the time to learn about bill pay with us. We look forward to your continued interest in the FedNow service. As a reminder, those who are interested are invited to join one or both of our roundtable sessions coming up in October. You can find the sign-up link on the FedNow community website. And we thank you again for joining us and hope that you have a wonderful day.